Great, thank you. And we're going to get started with the next meeting of the Housing Element Working Group. Welcome, everyone. We're going to begin with a roll call and then look at the meeting summary for the last meeting. We'll have an opportunity for public comment, and then we have a number of discussion items, and then another opportunity for public comment at the end of the meeting. And today we're going to be focused on the housing sites analysis and a discussion around opportunity sites for building housing in San Rafael. So with that, if I will go ahead and do the roll call, and if you can just indicate if you're here. Omar Carrera.
Here.
Thank you, Omar, welcome. Don Dickinson.
Here.
Andrew Henning is excused today. Linda Jackson.
Here.
Lorenzo Jones.
Here.
Cesar Lagleva. I don't see Cesar yet. Oh, he's just joining us now. Okay. Amy Lykover.
Here.
Diana Lopez.
Here.
Rena Lopez indicated she would be a little bit late. Tom Monahan. Not here yet. John Previtali.
Here.
Joanne Webster.
I'm here.
Great. And hi, Cesar. We called your name as you were logging in, so welcome.
Thank you. Sorry for being late.
No worries. And let's move on to the acceptance of the prior meeting summaries. Some of you who joined us as we were starting the meeting had some comments, and we'll start with Amy.
My name wasn't called. I don't know.
Who is that?
Daniel Ryan.
Oh, hi, Daniel. Thought I said your name. That's, yep. Okay, welcome.
Yes, on the third page of attachment 1, just simple typo, third bullet point, residence. Fourth page, do you see that, Barry?
Yeah.
Okay, fourth page under item 6, member and staff announcements. Staff provided an update to the resident survey and ongoing outreach efforts. I really think that should be explained in more than the fact that they provided an update. So my recollection was that I asked about the survey, and the rest of you might be able to bring a more eloquent phrase up, but the response was that it was undergoing review. So I think that should be, at least that should be noted, and ongoing outreach efforts. I'm not sure if anybody remembers what those were.
We will, we can go back and look at what was said at that point, make sure that it's more detailed than that.
Awesome.
I have just a little, well, I'll let you see how you want to name it, but it's on page 3 in the last bullet on my comment, and 4th line, there's a sentence that says in 2025, it should be 2026. And the way I'll read that one sentence that I think it should read, I'd like to ask, is in 2026, the first baby boomer turns 80. And then period. And delete the random comment about a silver tsunami.
I support that.
Done. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other changes or edits? Great. And for those who joined us late, I do want to just acknowledge that these minutes may be more detailed than what you're used to, and they're not really intended to be traditional minutes so much as notes from staff that we can then refer back to when we're drafting the housing element in a few months and need to remember what was said at the meeting without having to go and view the tape. So bear with us as we maybe excessively document what you've said, and we will try and not paraphrase and put words in your mouths to, you know, as best we can. That's I think something that we just want to explain. With the edits that have been made, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. And we'll ask all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you.
Nice job.
All right, thanks. Let me ask if there, Linda, were you about to?
I was going to
ask?
say, you might want to, not everybody voted, so you might want to see if anybody wants to abstain or is opposed.
Thank you. Any abstentions or opposition? John, you were absent from the last meeting, so I guess you're abstaining.
Correct.
Great. Okay. And we do have 9 attendees, and I want to provide an opportunity for public comment for items that are not on the agenda before we jump into our discussion items. Alexis, can you help me out if there's anyone who would like to speak? Please raise your hand and we'll bring you over. And this is only for items not on the agenda. We will also have another opportunity for comment at the end of the meeting. I don't see any hands at this point. Okay, so again, there'll be another opportunity as well as an opportunity to comment on the items that are on the agenda. So we're going to move on to 5A, which is our discussion items, and starting with the follow-up to the housing needs discussion from last month. I'm going to ask Ali to kind of lead this item, and then we'll have some comments from committee members, from working group members. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Barry. So, at the last meeting I felt, and the rest, everyone on the team felt like we had a really great meeting. We are very grateful for the input you provided and really appreciate what you shared, your perspective on housing issues. We all talked and we really felt like there was, it was very meaningful to us. And we talked about how to blend this information and your feedback into what we're doing with the housing element. And we feel like additional conversation, additional input would be important. And so we really want to provide some space at future meetings to provide opportunity for that, for additional sharing, in hopes of allowing the conversation to transform in a way that we can use it in a meaningful way to develop either new programs, eliminate programs that maybe are no longer relevant. But we wanted to make sure that you knew that we had how much we valued that, and that we feel like additional input is going to be important to us as we continue to develop this housing element. So you'll, in a future agenda, you'll see, you'll probably see a line item where we're going to provide opportunity for that. And I wanted to let you know that. And if you have any questions now, I welcome that at this point.
No question, Allie, but thank you, and to you and the rest of the team for acknowledging that.
Go ahead, Amy.
And this could open a whole can of worms, so it may be best deferred to our first discussion. I think that we have a really quite a lovely crew of experts here on board with this work group, and I just think it's crucial that we respect one another, where we're coming from, and that never should aspersions be cast on our perspectives.
Thank you. Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, this is at the heart of how we can really change and help San Rafael become the city that everybody wants it to be, in terms of, maintaining its momentum and its role and its culture, frankly, of and I'll talk history, but I'm going to stop there. I would add on, yesterday I was on Nextdoor, and there it is, another older lady saying, I'm losing the place I've been living in for decades. I only can afford $750 a month. My landlord needs the place. And where am I going to live? So I would add, if we can, 'cause it's wrapped up in income, but people are aging into severe poverty and living on the streets. And we got canaries in the coal, canaries right now in the coal mine. But we don't want to see it become any more tragic for the most vulnerable people. So anyway, this is a really important conversation. And I think what I'd like to encourage is that we look at the city as a whole, because I think as Omar has talked very eloquently about, is the concentration in the Canal neighborhood of immigrants. The people live in all 4 districts, all 4 city council districts, but we'll be getting into this when we talk about sites. But there is a need to spread diversity in its greatest realm across the city.
Diana?
Yeah, Barry, I just wanted to share with the group that there's a young woman that works right around the corner from where I live. And she's probably in her mid-20s. She went to school in Boston. She's a fine arts major, and she lived in Marin all her life, and came back because the pandemic came back. And was just talking to her, and she and her boyfriend were both from Marin County, looking for a place to live, can't find a place that they can afford. And they're going to, at the end of the summer, they're going to leave Marin to go to Oregon. And then another person that I know, late 30s, early 40s, he and his wife are going to they have good jobs. They're, well, not both of them, but one of them has lived in Marin all his life. And they really want to stay here, and they're not able to get into a home here in Marin. And so I guess, I don't know whether I'm just, because I'm doing this work, this is kind of coming to me, but I just wanted to share that just in between last meeting and this meeting, I've had several contacts with people who are having to leave Marin because they can't afford to live here. And the other thing that I wanted to say is how much I appreciated what people said last meeting. Lorenzo talking about the history and how we ended up here. And it is, and the various issues that we're all facing and everyone is facing. And it's such a privilege to be part of this group. So I just wanted to thank you all and share that with you.
Thank you, Diana.
Yeah, if I can add on we have a session where we're going to be focusing on the topic of affirmatively furthering fair housing. That'll be one of our future working group meetings. We are both required to do that by state law, but also it's such a central issue to this process in San Rafael that we really, even if it wasn't state law, would be doing that. I think, one of the takeaways from our last meeting was we should be infusing that in every one of our meetings and every one of our conversations. How can we do that? How do we do that? And I think the dialogue we started last time was good to, get us positioned to now, as we do, in all of these presentations and all of these conversations, to be thinking about how we can be a more equitable city, and what does that really mean, and what does that really look like. And again, we have some great thinkers in the room, and we hope that you'll help us with that discussion and dialogue, and with the programs that are ultimately included in the housing element. I see John's hand is up. John.
Yeah, thank you. So I didn't attend the meeting. last time, but I watched it in its entirety, and yeah, thank you everyone for being so candid. I just wanted to follow on to what was said about people not being able to buy homes here or continue to live here. So with just two very brief case studies. We have a home in our neighborhood. It's 2 doors down in Terra Linda. That's a rental. And we've actually had 2 families cycle through there just in the last 2 years. And I'll just briefly tell their stories without divulging their identities. But the first family has 2 children, both full-time employed parents. They were not able to find a home that matched their price point here in San Rafael, and they moved to Sacramento. The other is it's a slightly different case, but it's the same house. So another family moved in there. They actually moved from down the street into this home. So they had been in the neighborhood, for, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, raised their kids here. They actually wanted to buy that house that they were renting, but they were not able to, even though the owner wanted to sell it, and the house has been sold to someone who could afford it. But interestingly, in that particular case, they were able to buy a condo. And so they bought a condo just up the street in, I actually forget the name of the development in Terra Linda, but it's at the end of Freitas. And so they were able to stay in the community. They were able to find something that they were able to afford. So I would say that's a success story. So the first case I would say is unfortunately we weren't able to support this family who moved to Sacramento. But in the second case, they were able to find a place that was able to match their price point. So.
Thanks, John. Any other comments? We are going to just ask the public if anyone would like to speak on this, but any other comments from working group members before we do that? Okay, and I'm going to ask if anybody is in the attendees area and wants to address the topic. Yeah.
Sir, before you get there, I think Daniel
Sure.
had his hand raised. Is that Daniel?
Oh, sorry, Daniel. Missed you again. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, yeah. I was trying to distill my thoughts. I have probably way too much I want to say, and trying to summarize everything that's going through my head. But I would just like to add that I would hope the city takes a proactive approach and not a reactive approach to this, to the housing crisis. And I say that because, as someone who works across the state building affordable housing, a lot of state law has been passed in the last 5 to 10 years that is a reaction to what municipalities have been doing to basically prevent housing, keep communities, prevent development, and, frankly, exacerbate the problems that we're all talking about and experiencing today. So I just encourage the city to take a look at what those laws are that, and be proactive and rather than reactive to them, and work work to shape those to see how they can better benefit the city. And that's my simple statement.
Thank you, Daniel. Okay, I think we're going to go over to public comment. And I see Linda Howman.
She just disappeared.
Sorry.
Here you are.
I had to unmute myself. Hi, thank you so much. And I'm very encouraged to hear some of these comments today from this session. My name is Linda Howman. I belong to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Marin, and I'm a member of the Marin Organizing Committee, and we are working on the affordable housing issue. And we wholeheartedly support the development of affordable housing, especially at the Northgate Mall redevelopment. And then the old nursing center on Nova Albion Way is a possibility. There are many sites that are coming down the pike that we support. And we want to know how we can partner with you and how we can help get this stuff built. Because Linda Jackson's comment on aging, Diana Lopez's comment on young couples and young folks not being able to afford to live here, these are all so important, and the diversity issue as well. So we need our teachers to live here. We need our essential service workers to live here if we all want to maintain the lifestyle we're accustomed to. Thank you very much and good work. Thank you. Let's keep going.
Thank you, Linda. Are there any other comments from the public at this point? If not, I think what we will do is move on to our next item. We have a presentation on the housing sites discussion. Any final comments before we move on? Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and just to confirm, can everyone, if maybe somebody nods their head, you can see this? Okay, great. Thank you. We are going to talk about the housing sites analysis today. As you can see from this slide, we've had our introduction and orientation. We did the evaluation of the prior housing element. Last meeting focused on the needs assessment. Today, we're focusing on housing sites and constraints. We will be coming back to you with more discussion of constraints at a future meeting. And fair housing is also going to be one of our topics. Policies and programs will be our final meeting. And then we will be moving to the Planning Commission and City Council, and then on to the state for their review of our preliminary draft. Over summer 2022, we get the state's comments on the housing element back in the fall, and we will revise the element at that point and bring it forward for adoption by January 2023, which is our official state deadline for having a new housing element in place. So the task before us is to, one of the tasks before us is to show that we have specific sites in our city that can help us meet the regional housing needs allocation. And we've talked about the regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA, at our previous meetings, that the city needs to demonstrate capacity for 3,220 units of housing in the next 8 years. We are not required to construct 3,220 units as a jurisdiction, but we have to provide that opportunity for the private sector, for the nonprofit sector, and so on. That amount is broken down into the income categories you see here. We've talked about this at prior meetings. Lower income housing in Marin County, based on the benchmarks that we have, is something affordable to a family of 4 earning $146,350 a year. We recognize that there's an enormous need for housing serving households below that income point. And so a lot of the effort is really focused on how we meet and exceed our low and very low income assignment. So what kind of housing are we talking about in these income categories? When we're talking about above moderate income, this is housing that is market rate. It could be single family homes and townhomes. It could be even higher end apartments and condominiums. Moderate income housing is typically our market rate mid-range apartments, most of our accessory dwellings and smaller condominiums, below market rate ownership units. And you can see on this slide, the lower and very low income housing are primarily multifamily. So accessory dwelling units and multifamily housing, primarily rental housing, some limited ownership opportunities. The state of California will only acknowledge a site as being suitable for low and very low income housing if it is zoned at a density of at least 30 units per acre. So these are primarily sites that are zoned for multifamily housing or for commercial use where multifamily housing is permitted. So some ground rules for our site inventory. A site does not have to be vacant for us to count it. A designation of a site on our opportunity list doesn't mean it has to be developed during the planning period. So this is essentially an inventory of potential sites, but not an inventory of sites where there are specific developments that will happen over the next 8 years. Designation of a site doesn't limit the property to affordable housing. So we recognize that this is kind of a list of where affordable housing could be built, but not necessarily a list of sites where it must be built. Housing should be built on other sites too. So this is our best guess at where housing will be built and can be built in the city, but we encourage housing on other properties that may not be on this list. And that's an important point because we may not be able to predict every site. The last point, and this doesn't affect San Rafael as much as it does some of the other cities in Marin County, is that if we don't have sufficient sites to meet our needs, we have 3 years after the housing element is adopted to rezone sites in order to meet our needs. So that's an important distinction for some of our neighboring communities that are being asked to build multifamily housing where they never have before. Couple other ground rules. We have a lot of state legislation that dictates what we can count as a housing site and how many units we can assume are going to be built on these sites. We can't simply say that because zoning allows a certain number of units, that's the number of units that will actually be built. We need to estimate what the realistic capacity is, and we do that by looking at what recent development densities have been and what constraints may exist on these sites, like steep slopes or flooding that could make parts of the sites undevelopable or require that there be fewer units than what the zoning allows. The state has indicated that sites smaller than 1/2 acre or sites larger than 10 acres are generally considered unsuitable for affordable housing. And that's because most of it's really an economic issue that the sort of the sweet spot for building housing, multifamily housing developments that may have affordable units is somewhere in between 1/2 acre and 10 acres of land. Also, if we identify non-vacant sites as housing sites, then we need to demonstrate that those are realistic sites and that we're not just using wishful thinking when we put those sites on our list. We also need to identify which sites in our inventory could potentially support lower income housing. So this is something we really haven't had to do in the past. We actually have to designate sites by income category. If we carry over a site that was counted in the last housing element, then we need to be prepared to allow streamlined approval for future projects on those sites if they have affordable units in them. If 20% or more of the units are affordable, we have to offer by right approval. And that doesn't mean that there's no design review. That just means that there are certain, we can't apply discretionary review to those projects as we would with a brand new development. We also have state buffer requirements. So what these are is, this is an acknowledgement that, again, our task here is to come up with a list of all of the sites in San Rafael where our housing needs can be met. And we actually have to provide more sites than that 3,220 number, because not all of the sites on our list are going to be available. And what the state has said is that we recommend that you add a 20 to 30% buffer to your number. So that puts us at about 4,000 units that we're looking that we have to identify capacity for. And if we, what this also allows us to do is, if someone comes in with an application to build something on one of the sites on our list, and it's not affordable housing, if it's market rate housing, or if it's office building or a hotel or something else, we can still approve those projects and retain enough capacity to meet our housing needs. So we know that we need to provide flexibility in this process. We know we're going to face some pushback and objection if we tell the owners of all of these sites, you have no choice except to build affordable housing on your property. So these are opportunities that we're creating. These are incentives that we're creating. And so we need to provide the flexibility by having more sites than we actually need. Okay, so I'm going to go through a series of slides now that basically lay out the method for how we come up with our list of housing sites. And it's hopefully a fairly straightforward sequence, but there are a number of steps that we're going to walk you through. And some of this was in the staff report. So we start out with committed projects. So these are projects that haven't been built yet, that have been approved, and that we feel reasonably sure are going to come online in the next 8 years. The sites on which those projects are located are counted as housing opportunity sites, but we have to assign the units that have been approved into the income categories the units will serve. So if you look at this list, we have about 750 units of projects that are approved but not yet built. You can see the locations of those projects here. Most of them are moderate and above moderate income projects. So for example, the new apartments that have just been approved on Los Gamos, that's 169 moderate/above moderate and 23 low income units. Those appear on this table. We're about 30% of the way to already meeting the RHNA assignment for the moderate and above moderate, but only 14% of the way toward meeting our low and very low income need through what's already been approved. So we count these units because the planning period is it starts actually on July 1, 2022 and goes through the end of the beginning of 2031, January 2031. And so it's essentially anything that will come online during that time period. So one question that comes up is, what can we count as a housing unit? And there are 2 large assisted living projects that are in the pipeline. There are a few units in those projects that we can count, but there are a lot of units that we can't count because they don't have kitchens. They don't have full kitchens. So you see here on the slide that dormitories, barracks, emergency shelters, student housing, nursing homes, and so forth don't count as housing units. Assisted living units can count if they look like the floor plans on the slide on the top right, which is private kitchens. There's a kitchen right there. These are assisted living units. And by the way, these are not from San Rafael. They're just floor plans showing what counts and what doesn't. These don't have kitchens. These are bedrooms with bathrooms with common dining facilities. So the 2 large assisted living projects that have been approved, there are a few units that have private kitchens, but most don't count. Okay, step 2 is how many accessory dwelling units do we think will be built in the next 8 years, 2023 to 2031, because we can count those units as meeting our RHNA. And if you look at this trend line, these are actually the number of ADUs. Again, we're talking about in-law apartments or accessory dwelling units that were built in San Rafael between 2004 and 2017. Then we changed the law. The state changed the law, made it much easier to build ADUs. And you can see that in the last 4 years, the number of units permitted was much higher than it had been in the past. We're projecting 25 ADUs per year for the next 8 years, or about 200 units. We can count those accessory dwelling units as housing. The question is, what income groups do those units serve? And luckily for us, the Association of Bay Area Governments just completed a survey of 15,000 ADUs in the Bay Area and determined that in communities with fair housing concerns, which would include our community and every community in Marin County, 5% of those units are likely to serve very low income households, 30% low, 50% moderate, and 15% above moderate. This data has been accepted by HCD, the State Department of Housing and Community Development. And so applying those percentages to our projection of 200 ADUs, we do add about 70 more low and very low income housing units and about 130 moderate and above moderate. So again, we're looking at different types of housing sites that will help us meet our RHNA. By the way, this is a map showing where accessory dwelling units have been approved in San Rafael between 2014 and 2021. We included this map in part to show that this is actually a pretty effective way to affirmatively further fair housing insofar as it does get more affordable units out in single family neighborhoods and provides those rental housing opportunities throughout the city, in all parts of the city, in single family areas. In places like Gerstle Park and Terra Linda and Peacock Gap, there are accessory dwelling units that provide these additional housing options. Okay, the next step in this process is actually to go back and revisit all of the sites that we identified in the, in the 2015 housing element as being suitable for housing between 2015 and 2023. So the 2015 element identified the potential for 2,415 units. Now, one thing that's interesting about this is the RHNA at the time was 1,007 units, so that they actually provided a 140% buffer. In other words, they identified many more sites than were needed at the time to meet the housing, to meet the RHNA, which is actually good for us now because we have a large number of sites that can potentially be carried forward. The question is, are these realistic sites? So how did we do in the sites that we listed? So there were 45 sites that were identified in the 2015 housing element. And in fact, most of them are still vacant or underutilized. They were not developed with housing. Some of that is because we just didn't develop that much housing between 2015 and 2023. There was very little built during that time period. So for sites with residential zoning, we had only one of the 17 sites developed with housing, and one was recently approved for housing. 15 are still vacant or underutilized. For the 28 mixed use or commercial sites, which had the capacity for over 1,700 units, only 3 were developed with housing. One of those sites is now proposed for a hotel. Oops, sorry, that was an unintentional page advance. Let me go back. One is approved, one has an application in, and 22 of the sites are still vacant. So the question again is, are the 37 sites still, the remaining 37 sites still viable, and should we carry them forward? So I put a few slides in to show you some of the sites that were counted last time, because we want actually your feedback and thoughts on that question of sites to carry forward. I will say we are inclined to carry forward every site that was listed in the previous element because we need every site we can get, and we want to create every opportunity we can for housing in the community. So the default on all of these is to carry them forward unless there's a compelling reason not to carry them forward or to drop them from the list. So here are 2 sites. This is in the Northgate business area north of in North San Rafael. We're looking at Highway 101 here on the left side of the slide. So we're east of the freeway along Redwood Highway, Margarita Plaza and La Plaza. These are 2 office parks which were presumed to have the capacity for 322 units, which is a lot, actually 13% of the total housing capacity. The zoning is in place to allow multifamily residential development on these sites. So the question is, how can the city incentivize or work with the property owners to encourage housing on sites like this? Here's another example. 5 of the sites in the inventory are office buildings in the Northgate area, and most of these are on Las Colinas. One is on Northgate. These are banks or older office buildings. Some of these have higher vacancy rates. These are good sites in the current climate, in part because a lot of folks are working from home. There may be high vacancy rates, weak demand for office space. But again, we want to make sure our sites are realistic. And there's a question about whether we should continue to look for sites like these. The the 5 sites that you see on the slide here were presumed to yield 239 units, density of 38 units per acre. And again, the zoning is office, which allows multifamily residential, but also office development. Here's another one, the Marin Square Shopping Center, which is on Bellum, right where the freeways connect, the 580 and 101. And at the time the 2015 element was prepared, this site had been envisioned as either mixed use or as a potential Sutter healthcare facility. In 2018, the property was sold. The front area where the Ross store was refurbished. The rear portion of the site still is light industrial. But this is an opportunity site. Again, the question is, are sites like this or this site in particular still viable? And you can see that, the city at that time went through an exercise to even look at what development might look like on that site. And, all of these sites are unique, and we're revisiting each of these one at a time based on the current status. But, these are the kinds of questions we're asking. Okay, the flip side is that housing was either approved or proposed on sites that didn't appear on the inventory. So one of the questions is, how can we do a better job of predicting where our housing opportunity sites should be? These are projects that are in our development pipeline. 350 Marydale was not on our list in the housing element. The 999 Third, which is the relocated Whistle Stop. So the question here is really, if you see a site, how would you know if it's viable for housing? So food for thought, which we'll be coming back to in our discussion questions. Bear with me here. We're going to go through a few more slides and want to go through another couple of steps in how we are looking at our housing sites. So step 4 is to look at our downtown precise plan. So last summer, the City Council adopted a new precise plan for downtown San Rafael. Part of the process of developing that plan was to identify where housing might be built within the boundaries of this 265-acre area. And we identified sites for up to 2,200 units. You can see those in sort of the reddish colored rooftops here. The orange colored rooftops were projects that were in the development pipeline. The reddish colored footprints were where, based on our analysis during that process, we determined housing was viable. But again, some of these sites are in active use right now. Some of them would require, they're in different ownership, and they would require assembly before they could be developed, and so on. Okay, now we're getting into the kind of the nitty gritty, which is we've looked at the old database, we've looked at what's approved, we've looked at the downtown. What else is left? We have the assessor database with 18,000 parcels listed, and we actually sorted that database based on every variable that might influence whether housing would be appropriate on a site. What you see here on the right, where my cursor is a map showing the ratio of improvement value to land value. So if a site is beige, that means it has a low improvement value and a high land value. So if there's a low improvement value, that means it's a more viable site for someone to come in and redevelop the property. We focused on those sites that were down here at the lowest end of the range. These are sites that might be used for storage or parking lots and so on. And when we also looked at these other metrics, floor area ratio and so on, it's actually pretty impressive how much data you can cull from the county tax assessor records. We also followed up on eligible parcels, and we're still in the process of doing this, going to these sites and seeing if they're for sale or for lease. Are there visible constraints? Does the owner have any interest in doing development in the future, and so forth? So we're looking at additional potential on residential sites. Again, we have an inventory of every property in San Rafael that is zoned for residential use that's either vacant or that is underutilized. And when we say underutilized, we're talking about sites that are, for example, zoned for apartments but developed with a single family home, or a 4-acre lot that happens to be in the middle of a residential single-family neighborhood, sites that are under common ownership. So we have metrics that we look at. Same thing with commercial sites. We have, again, tax assessor records that help us identify what properties are commercially zoned, where housing is allowed, where the value of the improvements is low. We're also looking at where we know there's landowner interest or a pre-application to do a development that has housing. And Northgate is important in this conversation. Northgate is a large development proposal with the potential to meet a pretty big chunk of our housing needs, and also an opportunity to meet that need in a part of the city that hasn't seen a lot of affordable housing development in the last 10 or 20 years. So, that's kind of its own conversation. But again, looking at sites that meet these metrics and where housing might be built. We also have public and institutional land in the city that presents some housing opportunities. City-owned parking lots, for example, where there's an opportunity for joint development of housing above the parking, or surface lots where there might be housing with parking on the lower level. The County of Marin includes they own a substantial amount of land around the Civic Center. Our school districts are some of the major landowners in the city. You can see the other institutions, the utilities and tax exempt organizations. These sites actually provide some of the best opportunities for deeply subsidized housing in the city, because the land costs may be free, or the land may be subsidized, or there may be some public benefit associated with using these public properties for housing. Lastly, actually we're at the end. There are sites in the city that are not currently zoned for housing, where there may be opportunities for housing. In general, we are staying away from the industrial areas of the city, but we recognize that there are some sites on the edges of the industrial area, for example, around Davidson Middle School, Lindaro area on Francisco Boulevard West, where we're kind of walking distance from the SMART station, and so on, where there may be some opportunities for rezoning. So a few takeaways, again, based on all of the information. We have capacity. If you add all of these sites up, we do have capacity to meet our assignment and a buffer without doing major rezoning. But we want to make sure that we're distributing our housing sites equitably across the city and not concentrating all of our opportunities in one location. We also want to make sure that we're comfortable with by right approval on some of these carryover sites. In other words, allowing expedited review for development that might occur on these other sites that were listed previously. If we designate it, they may not come. Again, there's no guarantee that just because a site is on the list, that it'll be developed. We also recognize that the state of California has to approve our housing element. And they have said that if you're listing non-vacant sites, you need to show us that those are viable for development. Lastly, there may be additional opportunities beyond the inventoried sites. No matter how deep we dig, you may find that the next proposal for a big development comes on a site we never thought about. So we're leaving you with these discussion questions. They're also in the staff report. And really the rest of this meeting is intended to ask you as working group members to think about our sites and think about these questions. How can we affirmatively further fair housing in the way we identify sites? How can we identify sites that will actually develop, that are realistic? To what extent should we rely on accessory dwelling units to meet our needs? And are ADUs something we want to really strongly encourage? How large a buffer of extra sites should we include? And what role should natural hazards such as sea level rise play in guiding site selection? And are there any specific sites in the existing inventory, which you've seen because we included that as an attachment to the staff report, that you think should be added or removed? And I'm going to now end that once again very long presentation. Sorry about the length, and see if we can use raised hands to get a conversation going about the information we just presented and some of those questions. And I see Amy's hand up, and then John.
Thank you, Barry. Excellent report. Really appreciate that. So my questions are primarily clarification questions. Under the evaluation of assessor data for additional sites and the way that you sorted them. This has a lot to do with previous discussions we've had on sustainability. If you recall, I think it was our first meeting, there was general consensus that that thread should be brought through a discussion of sites. I'm wondering whether the sites could be sorted by whether there are environmental factors that would be hazardous to dwellers. I'm particularly concerned, and this comes from an environmental justice perspective, that moderately low to low income residents are plunked next to highways. Okay, we can say they're close to transportation, that sounds good, but honestly, their kids are breathing the air. And so that's something that strikes me when I look at a lot of these sites. And I think something that we have to keep in mind. So environmental hazards. And if in fact sites are selected that are in areas that are highly polluted, traffic is considered. But if sites are selected that are in areas that are polluted, as far as air pollution, I'm thinking about asthma and stuff like that, that the sites be really rigor, that there be a rigor applied to creating park-like situations on these larger sites so that we can balance the carbon sequestration. So that's one comment. And then are there incentives aside from streamlining approval for ADU development? Do you mind if I just go through the questions really quickly? And you're jotting them down, right? And then we can answer them when it's appropriate. And then is there a chart for equivalent rents that would qualify for low and very low for ADUs? I understand that it's based upon income, but for example, if someone builds an ADU and they charge $3,000 in the city of San Rafael, how does that qualify on our different income categories? Or if they charge $2,000, if they charge $1,000. I've been looking at rents in different apartment buildings, and I just was wondering how we fare. And then let's see now, just a procedural, it sounds like this is something that you folks do at the city level, procedural question. When you declare, when you put a site on our inventory, to what degree have you spoken with the owner? For example, I noticed that the Elks Club was on the site. And I was wondering if it was on the inventory. I was wondering if that discussion has transpired. So yeah, I think those are my questions. I really urge that we consider air pollution to be a constraint that would need to be mitigated.
Great. Thanks, Amy. And I think what we'll do is maybe hold the answers till we get a few more comments from other folks who would like to speak, but we will come back to those questions. And I'm going to go to John and then Lorenzo.
Okay, great. Thanks, Barry. I actually have some similar questions on some of the same topics. And the first one is about ADUs. I'm wondering if we know how the ADUs are being used. I know that I don't know if it's a tendency, but a lot of ADUs are being used for Airbnbs. And I don't think that's, obviously in the spirit of new housing. And also how we as a city raise revenue from ADUs. Like for instance, are there fees or some sort of taxes on that we can use to support those new residents. The next question is about the new units, and you published that list of new units, which I thought were great, but I'm wondering how we decide how many are rentals versus units that are sold. Because I think it's important to, you know, have units that are owned by folks, and particularly affordable units that can be bought by folks. I completely agree with the last speaker's concern about pollutants in commercial and light industrial areas. I could just tell you briefly that I lived in an area in San Francisco for many years that is known to have a high instance of asthma. So, and it was between two freeways, 280 and 101. And the thinking is that it was probably because of particulates from diesel trucks. So I feel like that is a very important consideration. But also, sort of on the flip side, I'm wondering if it may be possible to not have to designate specific sites for mixed use development in light industrial and commercial areas. I don't know, it's a balance, obviously. And but I think it was Linda Jackson who may have, and Linda, I hope I was interpreting what you said in the last meeting correctly, but may have said that you know, she was very much in favor of loosening restrictions on adding housing to commercial and light industrial areas, and that makes perfect sense to me. I think that there are a lot of areas in San Rafael that would benefit greatly through that sort of mixed use development. And then the last thing that I will mention is that I'm wondering if I believe there, you know, I believe I heard there was going to be a website for people to submit ideas for sites that they thought would be good for new housing. And I was wondering if that ever was established, and if there's any data. And on a related note, I read in the potential changes to the former housing element in the staff comments, that there's also an idea for a website for owners to solicit developers, basically place their sites, their website that would then you know, develop interested in redevelopment. I just was wondering if we could talk about that. I think it's a great idea. So thank you.
Thanks, John. Lorenzo?
I have two conversations, or maybe one conversations. Then going back to the slide presentation, I know you sent out the assessment inventory prior to this meeting, but maybe in the future it would be great. I don't know if it's a privacy conversation, if we could have that PowerPoint that you just showed, because you have some great data on it that I would love to refer back. My question is, on one of the slides, we had a low percentile of units or housing that was developed based on what was available, if I believe correctly, right? Yep. And then you had a slide that showed the number of projects that were either entitled or under construction that were not on that list, correct? So correct. My question is, I would love to have data as an assessment of why didn't those properties, why didn't we get those developed? And how did those properties that are in entitlement or under construction that wasn't on the list, how did they make it through the funnel? And what was it about those properties or the process that got those properties built? So I'd be interested in knowing from an assessment what worked, what didn't work, what did we do well, what was the engagement, as well as how did those particular properties make it through the pipeline that weren't on our original list. So just a question and thought. I'd love to have that information as a learning. So just my thoughts.
Thanks, Lorenzo. And before I go to Don, I want to say we want that information too. I mean, I think it's a puzzle, and we're searching for the answer. And I'll tell you that having worked on housing elements in other cities, it's not unique to San Rafael. This is a problem. It's like a crystal ball. I mean, how do you know which are the sites that are going to, where the confluence of factors is going to make somebody say, oh, I want to develop here, unless we get that information from all of the property owners. It's a tough nut, but yeah, thanks. Love to hear more thoughts about that question from the group too. And I think we're going to keep going with comments, and I do have a kind of a long list of responses that we're going to have to come back to at some point. Don.
Yes, I found it very interesting to actually see the list from the previous housing element. And I was impressed how many sites on there had the potential for adding residential units, to particularly the commercial sites. But my concern is that, and I agree that probably most of the ones identified previously have the potential for housing. But my understanding is that it's not only a requirement that they have the capacity for it, but they're also likely to be developed with housing during the 8-year time period. And I know from my involvement at the county, that's a real issue. I mean, there are a lot of potential sites, but in reality, the majority of those probably aren't going to be developed with housing in an 8-year time period. For instance, you can show all the churches in West Marin as potential housing sites, and they have that potential, but is it realistic to assume that that is going to occur within an 8-year period? And it's particularly important in terms of the lower income units, because as many people here know, it's very difficult to go through the pre-development process and acquire all the required funding for a below market rate housing project. And it typically takes years to do that. So I think we have to be realistic in terms of what might happen in 8 years, which, as opposed to what the ultimate capacity is. And the questions I had were, my understanding was that the Assembly bill that changed the 30 unit per acre minimum to be able to count to 20 units per acre applied countywide and not only to the unincorporated area. Linda's shaking her head no, so I assume that's not the case then. Because that legislation runs through 2028, but.
Yeah, it had a population cap on it. If you were over that population, you had 30 is the number.
Okay, so it's probably Novato and San Rafael that didn't.
Right.
And in terms of a property like Northgate, which I think everyone recognizes as being a potential for a significant amount of housing, you obviously have to look at the time frame, because I think their proposal even had some development by 2025, and then the second phase not until 2040, as I recall. So only some of those units, I assume, would be able to be counted in this phase. And also the question, since Northgate was shown on the previous housing element list with 1,300 units, but only 200 were projected to be built by the end of this cycle, does Northgate then become a by right site because it's a recycled property? And just a couple of specific questions. One of, in going through the list, the biggest undeveloped property in Dominican is 18 acres. And it's labeled in the existing housing element as Dominican University end of Dominican Drive. It actually never was owned by Dominican University, but you may or may not have picked up the fact that it was actually just transferred to a wildlife conservation group. It was actually deeded to them for a tax write-off because the developer gave up because he couldn't satisfy the fire department in terms of two means of access to the property. So he dedicated it late December of last year to the Western Alliance for Nature to be preserved as permanent open space. And also the other big property in this neighborhood is the Dominican University property. And I'm on an advisory committee with the university, and I've actually emailed the vice president to find out what their current thinking is, because it's been years since we last talked about the potential use of that property. And I think in terms of the sites, a site, for example, like Marin Square, where there's been a significant investment in redeveloping it, it had the potential to have a lot of housing. But with the recent significant investment of redeveloping it, redoing it, I think that moves it way down in terms of when some potential future use may occur. And I think you have to look at that in terms of which properties probably move farther off in terms of the potential to be redeveloped and have housing added to them. Those were my comments.
Thank you, Don. Great comments there. Daniel, and then Linda.
Thanks. So I could obviously talk about this for hours if you gave me time to. This is my career, and I have lots of thoughts. But I guess I want to start with a question, which is really, you asked multiple things, which is how to meet RENA and why sites aren't developed. And those are very two different things. Because I can very clearly tell you why a ton of those sites will never be developed, but you need to list them to meet RENA. So I don't know if you really want the answer to the questions you're asking or not. And I'm happy to go through a lot of the things that you're missing for the true viability of any of those sites to be affordable housing sites. That, again, is getting into how the sausage gets made a little too much for maybe this conversation, but I'm happy to share at least some of the highlights of why those types of sites will stay vacant, quite frankly.
Go for it.
I'm seeing some thumbs up, so I think you should lay it on us, and we'll take it at face value. Go ahead.
Yes, Daniel, I think that's helpful that we hear that, because we're up against that as developers of affordable housing.
Great. Well, thank you, group, for indulging me in this. But so I guess the first thing I would say is there are factors at the state level and policies at the state level that are dictating where housing sites are viable. And that's HCD and TCAC, which is the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee. Now, they have what's called their opportunity map, which they came out with in 2018, I want to say. And they went to competitive rounds of funding starting in 2018 when the state ran out of its bond cap for affordable housing projects. Now, on this map, there are two things that are very important. And they're designated, or areas designated highest resource and high resource. And the state in their policy is trying to quantify access to high resources for low income individuals. But this, from a funding standpoint, means that if you are not in one of these areas, it is right now, and this changes frequently, but as of right now, those applications aren't getting through. So we're not even looking at sites that are not in these high and highest opportunity resource areas for new development. So you can look on the website yourself, 2022 TCAC HCD opportunity map, to see what parts of the city are considered high and highest resources. So that's one factor. The other is what parts of the cities are considered DDA and QCT. DDA stands for difficult to develop area, and QCT stands for qualified census tract. Now, these are designated by HUD at the federal level, and they allow you to get 30% more in tax credit equity, to simplify it, So if you're not in one of those sites, it's a lot harder to finance one of these deals. Now, why I said, do you need to meet the RENA numbers or do you want to look at affordable housing, is lining these two things up is a very, very small Venn diagram of viable housing sites, you know, throughout Santa Fe and the state, frankly. So those are two big things that I would suggest that you take a look at, because they greatly impact the viability of financing for affordable housing projects right now. The other thing I would say is, if it's not going to get 40 units, it's probably never going to happen. Because of how the low income tax credit program works, it is almost impossible to get a tax credit investor for anything below 40 units, and 40 units is low. That's stretching it. So again, whether if the site is 5 acres, or sorry, 0.5 acres, and it's zoned for 30 units, and you know, by right, there's a density bonus of 35% or higher for tax credit, or sorry, you know, 100% affordable deals, you're barely getting there from a perspective of a project that can pencil, right? There's just the resources to manage a building that small will make the project not viable from, you know, to pencil in general. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. But again, there are things beyond the, unfortunately, the city standards folks control that changes frequently that will dictate why, you know, why some of these sites will sit vacant. And, you know, we're at the whim of that. And that's, you know, often state policy. So I'm happy to go into further detail, but I think this is, I've used up a little too much of my time. So I will pause.
That was
now.
really helpful. No, thanks. Thanks. That was actually very helpful. I actually have a follow-up question, if that's okay. When you're looking at the highest resource and high resource areas, and separately the DDA and the QC areas, are those overlapping, or are they different locations?
So those are two different maps. So there's not, you know, one is designated at a federal level, and then, you know, the IRS has designated these areas for the low income housing tax credit program to get more tax credits. And that's the DDA and the QCT, right? So these are designated as either areas of high poverty, which is a qualified census tract, or a difficult to develop area means usually a wealthy area where it's harder to develop in.
Okay.
This is unrelated to the state's map that they came out with very recently. There are obviously similarities. Highest resources areas often are in DDAs, and low resource areas are often in QCTs, but they do not overlap perfectly. Again, it's not impossible to do it, but it's so much harder to do it. And, you know, this is price of the lots aside. This is a lot, you know, taking a lot of other things aside, but just from a policy standpoint, we can't compete for the basic resources needed to build any sort of substantial affordable housing if, you know, those criteria aren't met, or at least a few of them aren't met. So
Barry, I'd like to suggest that the notes reflect really in detail what Daniel has just said, so that we have time to, those of us who don't necessarily speak this language, have time to absorb it and research it and look at some of those websites. Thank you.
Agreed.
Daniel, I have access to the state high resource and highest resource areas. Could you send us a link to the other maps? It doesn't have to be right now, just at some point. It would be great. I think everybody could benefit from
yeah,
having
if you're okay with HUD's not user-friendly mapping system, then be my guest. But yeah, so the HUD user map, I believe, is the website, but I can either contact you offline about that, or we can.
Yes, that sounds great.
Yeah,
Offline would be great, and then I can, Barry or I will, or Alexis will distribute to the group. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, that is really interesting. If there's some kind of inherent conflict in trying to affirmatively further fair housing and introduce affordable housing in communities where it may be difficult to develop, but that's part of the goal. If there's no funding in those areas, by definition, it's kind of like we're chasing our tail. Okay, Linda and then Joanne.
Thank you. And thank you, Daniel and Dawn. I like your updates on the sites as well. So I just welcome to the crazy world of housing elements. You know, I did have the pleasure of getting to do this a couple times. I think the state, rather than realizing that the system is really a challenge, just keeps loading up on the requirements to try to make it work. But almost sometimes it feels like if you're on the housing sites list, you're not going to get housing out of that site. And then and the housing is going to come from places that you never even thought of, like 33 San Pablo, which I don't think is on your list, but 33 San Pablo was built on a former office building that the owner decided, I can't rent this out anymore. I'm going to tear down this office building and I'm going to put up a number of units. So that's an example of how you can't really, the crystal ball isn't really clear. And Daniel explains how part of why that happens for the funding for the really truly affordable projects. It's not just, you know, we can rely on a lot with 30 units and more to the acre with our zoning for trying to meet the need, but it really doesn't meet the need because the affordability levels are all skewed up. If affordable housing is a family of four making $146,000 a year, there's something wrong with the methodology. Okay, because families are trying to get by on less than 50, whole households of shared families trying to get by on less than 50,000 a year. So I would love to see a little bit in our housing element that the housing planners in Sacramento are going to read about how this methodology does not really get to what our housing need is in San Rafael, because it's based in part on the tremendously high housing values of Ross and Belvedere and Tiburon and Sausalito and Mill Valley, which are different communities from San Rafael. And so we pay a price for that in not having to really meet the need of the people who truly need it for low income. So I would push for a higher buffer. You know, we were able to do over 100% last time. Let's go for 300%. Let's put everything on the list that we can, because what the benefit is, if you're on the list this time, you do get a little perk. And that might be enough to help people like Daniel say, oh, this is worth going for it on the site, because I do have some protections from having to go through a really onerous process. So I just want to put that challenge out there to have a goal on that. So walking through the questions, how can we ensure that projects are distributed equally around the city and meet the mandate? You know, we do it by those maps and seeing where the housing is. Part of me is wanting to say do it by the council member districts, so that we're really looking at what's happening in each district. Although I know that Micah Jordan Scolati has a district that's already pretty high density. But she might have some areas there that could redevelop for housing and be a wonderful investment for the community. But that's just a suggestion. In terms of how to support the reuse of non-vacant sites, I'd say ask the developers, ask the property owners, and I'm glad Joanne's going after me, so I'll go the other way. So you might have some ideas about how to do that, but you know, really talking with the people who do these kind of things as what are the policies and programs and the zoning that we need to have. How do we balance the needs for mitigations? And we heard the issues about air quality and noise. You know, San Rafael has really good air quality. And we've always had good air quality. So it's not been a challenge because we're relatively near the ocean and the winds blow it all over. So over to the East Bay. So, and around the world, people live next to freeways. I live next to an auto shop. You know, this is just, so mitigations, I just want to say we handle it through mitigations and making sure that there's good ventilation and the windows deal with the noise. And these can be very livable units. Also, there's an EV thing going on, and I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see quite a difference. I'm sure a number of you have been on the freeway and you say, oh man, I'm surrounded by EVs. When did that happen? How can we accurately identify sites in the next years? Well, we're doing this. I think, I don't know whether you've contacted Marin Interfaith Council, but they would be an organization to go through to reach all the church facilities, the religious institutions in Marin, to say, are you thinking about any kind of housing on your site? You know, the Lutheran Church in North San Rafael became Alma Via a number of years ago. That's an example, and that was not on our sites list. We had no idea, but it was a declining congregation, and they decided to work with a nonprofit and built some memory care and some assisted living. So that's an example of a site that wasn't known about, but it happened because of a church deciding to develop it. Victory Village in Fairfax is another example of that. There are sites to add and sites to take off. I think we could be looking at the north side of Miracle Mile. We didn't do that last time, but it was suggested, and I think those they're smaller sites, but you know, that I know Daniel was saying you want to have 40 units. I live in a project that's 60 units the acre. There's only 10 units. I'd say of the sites that were built that you had in the list and how many were built, more than half of them were under 20 units. So we shouldn't forget that smaller units on small sites are going to help meet the need as well. So north side of Miracle Mile, all around the hill where Commerce Clearinghouse is, where Nazareth House is, all those apartment buildings are like 2 stories. Got a lot of parking lots in those buildings behind them, and they're right up against the hill. And last time around, there were some suggestions to think about, you know, redeveloping that kind of those apartments to higher density. You could go up 3, 4, 5, 6 stories against the hill and be quite a lovely, you know, addition in Terra Linda up there. West American Bank, 4th and East Street. And I'll just note too that there was a court case in Simi Valley that assisted living is a housing unit, believe it or not, that people live there, and that counts as housing. So might want to look into that to see whether we need to really rely on having some sort of kitchen facilities when these are truly places where people live. And let's see, I wonder whether we want to add in an SB9 analysis, like there's an ADU and JDU analysis. It probably isn't going to be a lot of units. They have to be owner occupied, and they can't be next to another similar development. So there's some constraints built into SB9 that's going to limit its applicability. But Daniel might have some developers may have some thoughts about how, you know, maybe we get some units out of that. And I think I'm almost, I think some rezoning, high density zoning in the NC, the neighborhood commercial district, would be another one. And I think removing the ground floor retail requirement in the CO district would be another one too. You need it on 4th Street, but do you really need ground floor retail on all the other mixed use districts? I think that's a hindrance because retail is changing in how it operates. And finally, ADUs and JDUs, 25% of the single family homes in Vancouver have an ADU. And everybody talks about how lovely Vancouver is. It took a number of years to get to that point. But I think when you say, how much should we put toward ADUs? I think a lot, because they meet a real need for younger people, single people, couples starting out, people who want to move out of mom and dad's house and stay in town. And they help the homeowners be able to afford their units. So that's my thoughts about ADUs. I think that we're getting screwed by the state on how to count those. In previous surveys that I did, the affordability of them is much greater than what the Bay Area came up with. And again, we're getting screwed on that. If we can do our own survey, I think we'd find that they are far more affordable than what the Bay Area level is, because we're in, you know, a lot of people rent them out for, you know, they rent them out to somebody they know at a reasonable rent. So That's plenty to go. Thanks for all the good questions. Joanne, tag, you're it.
Oh my goodness, I'm exhausted, Linda. No. Thank you so much. And Daniel, thank you so much for educating us on how difficult it is to actually make these affordable housing projects feasible. The chamber hears it all the time, but I think it's really, really important for the community to understand that we want to have them here, but it's just to make it pencil is so difficult. So thank you so much. We have projects actually on this list that have been entitled and they can't get financing. So that's how thin the margins are. So thank you so much for that. Relative to the office space at Northgate or Northern San Rafael, yeah, I think targeting office complexes is a good idea. I mean, those usages are going to change. And to Linda's point, you know, people live in cities all over the world, you know, and you can design projects so that you don't even feel like you're living next to a freeway. So I totally agree with that. Marin Square, you know, to Don's point, that property owner did put some money in. However, I think that it was designated a long time ago as a housing opportunity, but I think the property owners were told that traffic was a problem. So do we fold that in and say, okay, we're just going to keep carrying this project on the list or this parcel on the list, but actually it's never going to happen because traffic is an issue. Same thing with Canalways. I don't know if Canalways is on the list. You know, is that something that, you know, we want to open that box again, but is that an opportunity? I love Linda's idea about district. I think that's great. I also think that do we start to explore types of housing in each district so that it's equitable and it's distributed so that we don't have neighborhoods that are all single family homes and we don't have neighborhoods that are all multifamily homes across the district. The county did an RFI for Project Home Key. So they put out information to property owners to see if they were interested in selling their parcel for Project Home Key. So that model exists. So maybe we could do that in the city of San Rafael. A couple of parcels that I'm not sure have been identified on the list. And if they are, I'm sorry, Barry. Toscolito Tires, is that on the list? And then Linda mentioned the West America Bank on 5th Street. There's also one on East Francisco Boulevard. There's 4 of them. Their banks is another one, you know, to target. The banking industry is changing. I don't see them needing these giant square foot buildings. Scandinavian design, is that an opportunity as well? Talk about ground floor retail. It's really, really hard to put, you know, a tenant in 10 to 20,000 square feet. So is it possible that they can actually expand? I think there's a parking lot or there's a parcel behind them. So can they expand and can we have, you know, more units upstairs? That's my comments. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Joanne. We have Omar and Diana, and then after that, I might circle back and answer some of those questions that came up earlier. Go ahead, Omar.
Thank you, Barry. I just want to build on some of the comments that Joanne shared, and thank you, Daniel. Very helpful information, and Linda as well. So for Canal Alliance, we always are advocating for placemaking and climate resilient projects that focus on housing and parks. That is what we always look for and support. I understand that this list is a preliminary list, and there are many factors that will make these projects feasible or not. So I also understand that at this stage, the city wanted to stay away from adding properties located in the industrial or light industry areas. But I do think that we should put in the list some of the properties that potentially can help us respond to multiple challenges that we have, especially in the canal area. And I want to bring Canalways back to the conversation because this property really can help us to respond, or potentially has the potential to help us respond to many challenges that we have in the canal, including sea level rise, housing, access to parks, soccer fields. And I do recognize that this property has multiple layers of complexity, but solving housing is not an easy task. So I'm wondering if this is the time for us, instead of continuing carrying on all beliefs and historical context that maybe needs to be revised now, to see how can we use the few open spaces that we have in that area to respond to these complicated challenges. So I'm just raising the question that perhaps this is the time to add to the list some properties that maybe has been all believed they are so complex that let's not do anything with them, and really just challenge ourselves to see, let's actually study a little bit more to come to that conclusion. So that will be my recommendation, is to include in this list some properties in the light industry and industrial area so that we can assess what's possible.
Thank you, Omar. Diana?
Yeah, I just have a couple of quick things. First of all, right between where Linda and I live, there was a used car a lot, and that's gone. And that's a good big piece of property that you may want to look at. It's on 4th Street between F and G. And so that's one thing. And the other thing that really, after listening to Daniel, that we really need to understand what the political, the political environment, the regulatory environment, and not, I think it's great to list all these properties, but what's the reality? And one of the realities is the political reality, and where can we press to what needs to be done, and where can we press to help the situation in building housing. So I don't know what that looks like, but I see from the group of people here that there's a lot of knowledge that we need to tap into to really take a look at that and work at this from a variety of different levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. I don't see any hands raised up. We are going to come back to some additional questions and comments, but I just want to take this chance to go through some of the comments. Amy, you had asked about the environmental hazards and whether that data might be gleaned from the tax assessor information. The only thing the tax assessor tells us related to hazards is the average slope on the property. So we can have somewhat of a proxy for things like landslide hazards or slope related hazards, but nothing related to air quality. But we obviously map these sites and we can see the ones that are next to the freeway or close to the freeway and include that information and take that into consideration. I don't know that it would disqualify a site from being on the list, but certainly as a disclosure item, we would make note of that. The incentives for accessory dwelling units. Yeah, I think let's come back to that one. The equivalent, the issue of rents for ADUs. We do have there are rents that are associated with the very low, moderate, and above moderate income household sizes. It's not specific for ADUs. It's just what is the affordable rent for a household of 1, 2, 3, or 4 people and so on. We have that information. It'll be in the needs assessment. So that's documentation that we'll provide. You asked a really interesting question about notification of owners who are on the list. We've had that conversation at the staff level, and again, coming from doing this in other communities, that's really up to the city. The state doesn't require that you notify property owners. We will be doing that. We're not just going to say, hey, surprise, you got added to this list when you weren't looking. We want to make sure that we've done that and that's disclosed. There may be some folks who object to being on this list because they feel it's somehow constraining them. It really, I mean, I'll say that it really isn't, because it's basically giving them an opportunity, but not really constraining what they can do on their property. I mean, it is important, and the state is actually getting a little bit more assertive about saying, well, we don't want to see a site on this list unless a property owner has said, we're particularly on the non-vacant sites that we're, we're okay being there, that we are interested. That's important when you were looking at things like office buildings and office parks, where they may never have contemplated housing on the site. So, we are working on that. Then John, I think you asked a question about ADUs and short-term rentals. And Ali, I don't know, maybe you want to respond to that question about ADUs?
Sure. So a number of years ago, the city council adopted a short-term rental ordinance, and the topic of ADUs being part of that, scheme of allowing, a property owner to use that for a short-term rental. And the outcome was that we would allow that. City council wanted to allow that. It was a very different time before the ADU laws had made some, visible changes in the way we were seeing ADU requests come through the city. So we have, as Barry was showing, upwards of 20 to 25 units per year that we're seeing now, where previously we were seeing about 5 per year. And so it is, it's a good question, a question that maybe we need to revisit. Previously, we didn't really think there was a significant effect in not allowing them, but that's changed. There are a lot of ADUs now. So thank you. Yeah, I think that's something to think about in terms of adding a fee to ADUs. Were you, John, I want to make sure I understood that correctly. Were you thinking a fee that was applied to ADUs or a fee that was applied to the short-term rentals?
ADUs, yeah, it's just the concept of making sure we have enough revenue for city infrastructure, for schools and whatnot, with the influx of population living in ADUs.
So we're not able to add, the state has limited our ability to add any additional fees, and even limits our ability to apply certain existing fees to ADUs. The school impact fee still applies, so that's still being paid when an ADU is proposed. Yeah, so those are the two. Were there any others, Barry, that you were?
No, I think there may have been a question about and actually, I don't know if this question was asked, but I did want to bring it up, which is one of the challenges with ADUs is that we don't control whether they're occupied or not. And, we permit them, and then that's kind of the end of it. And we can count them toward our RHNA as moderate or low or whatever category. But then the owner could turn around and use it as their office or guest quarters, or so, there are some limitations relying too heavily on ADUs. And I think, one of the reasons that we've said 25 per year is going to continue, as opposed to doing what some of the Marin cities are doing and saying, oh, we're going to ramp up and do 100 ADUs a year. And that's going to be our entire arena. It doesn't work. It doesn't, you don't get that, that high of an occupancy, and the renters are often, not that there's anything wrong with family member living in the ADU, but it's often not serving a low or extremely low income tenant with needs. So I think that's just an important limitation. Couple other questions that came up. John, I think you asked about a website where the public can submit ideas for sites. I'll say that the County of Marin is using a program where folks can weigh in online about specific sites. And I don't think we've put that specific question on our housing element website, but that's something we can do. And definitely provide that opportunity for the community to suggest sites or to weigh in on some of this stuff. Once this document is drafted, we'll be looking for public comment, which will include the entire site inventory. So there'll be an opportunity at that point, when all of this is mapped and available, to get more information about the sites. Question about Northgate phasing. Yeah, Don Dickinson, you asked a really excellent question that I don't know the answer to, about the by right requirement for the units at Northgate. They only counted 200 units in the previous housing element, and we're now looking at a much higher number. So, maybe it's the first 200 are by right. We need, I think, a legal answer to that question to come back to you with, but thank you for raising that. And then Omar brought up Canalways, and I would say that with Canalways, it's a matter of opening the door little by little at a time. And with the general plan, we included language that raised possibility of Canalways as, as a development site. We can do that a little bit more and continue to affirm that. But in order for that site to really be a viable housing opportunity site and for us to consider it, there's more work that would need to be done, more inventorying of wetlands and looking at sea level rise issues. So I think we can continue to create the groundwork for that process to happen. We're constrained a little bit in this by the fact that we're working with the general plan EIR for this project. So we're not looking at allowing development at a large scale in places where it's not currently allowed under our general plan 2040. So in some place like Canalways, we really can't, without redoing the EIR, we can't suddenly say, oh, housing is now permitted across the site. And then there are also issues related to, development in sea level rise areas that we would need to come up with a solution that's acceptable and that works. So, but to continue to move that forward, I think is good. And at some point there will be an area plan for the canal in Southeast San Rafael priority development area that would look more seriously at that. Ali, I don't know, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna, the one thing that's really a major question for that site is, what's there? And we've talked about the fact that there's wetlands and potentially, some sensitive protected species, plants and animals and birds. But we don't really know the extent of it. And so the first thing that would need to happen for this, to Barry's point, is to evaluate how sensitive that site is and where there might be opportunities. And maybe that is through the PDA. It doesn't mean that, that this isn't a potential development site. It's just that looking at this as a housing opportunity site would be really difficult without really knowing what's underneath or what's there and doing that analysis. So yeah, just that's all I wanted to. And that may be something that we do with the PDA when we get to that point, Omar.
Thanks, Ali. Okay, I also wanted to ask Rena and Cesar if they wanted to make any comments or add anything. We haven't heard from you during the Q&A so far, and go ahead, Cesar, if you want to add anything.
No, I actually don't have anything to add. I appreciate the level and depth of the information and knowledge that people are sharing, and the PowerPoint presentation and the identified sites are sound to me, and I don't have any additional comment to make at this time.
Thanks. Great. And Rena, thank you for joining us from work. I know you're on mute right now if you're speaking.
Sorry, I had to wear my mask, so I hope you can hear me well.
It's fine.
Yeah, thank you. It was interesting to hear and to learn more about it, how all this is coming along with housing. But I want to say that one of the places that I agree with some of the colleagues here is that to target the offices like the bank areas, because some of them are empty, having as a big lots. We can use those as a housing. And yeah, there's several ones in San Rafael and even in Terra Linda. And yeah, pretty much those are the comments that I want to share with you. Yeah.
Thank you, Rena.
Thank you.
And John, and then we may go to public comment after that, so we make sure we have enough time. We have just 15 minutes left.
Okay, I just have actually two questions. I'll make them as quick as possible for Daniel. The first one is, I have to mention this, it's kind of a rhetorical question, but did you say that difficult development areas, DDAs, are typically wealthy areas and that they don't get as much HUD funding? Because if so, that seems like a form of redlining to me.
No, so HUD designates a lot of things. For the purposes of the map that I'm describing, there are two designations. One is called a difficult development area, and one is called a DDA, and the other one is a QCT, which is a qualified census tract. And they pretty much represent the either ends of the spectrum of poverty or difficult to develop because of usually, it's more affluent and there's higher barriers to development. For both of those, you get more tax credits. So
I see.
In both of those instances, you get more tax credit funding for your affordable projects. So we often look for those.
It's the opposite.
Right.
Okay, understood. Thanks. And then my next question for you is, you mentioned that projects typically have to have a minimum of 40 units, and to Linda's point and others' point, there are a lot of examples of successful developments that have far fewer units in San Rafael, and being an infill city, I really like the idea of smaller developments. Also, there's research that shows that smaller developments are more acceptable by the existing community. They reduce the possibility of, or the risk of reducing home prices. They're also just like a more modern concept compared to huge tenements and all that stuff. And so I could go on and on, but my question is, is it possible to have a development that is over 40 units, but on multiple sites? You talked about operations costs. What type of operations costs are you talking about? Are you talking about ongoing or construction operations?
So thanks. Let me clarify some of my comments, right? So I'm coming from the perspective of a multifamily affordable housing developer. So obviously I agree that a lot of sites, smaller projects would be great and are great. Those are almost by necessity a different funding than I work with, right? So that's funded through, you can't compete for a lot of the public funding with densities that small. And to your point, you can package those into one project for the purposes of these applications. And we do that, right? So you can get a bunch of 20 unit sites, say 3 20 unit sites, and then it's called a scattered site development in the eyes of the state. And we do that too, right? So if we can get enough small parcels together, then it makes sense. For the operations cost, right? I'm talking about on an ongoing operational perspective, right? So, as a nonprofit affordable housing provider, we not only provide, all the costs for maintaining the building, staffing, management, whatnot, but the regulatory costs of continuing to be in compliance. And we provide resident services, a full resident service coordinator for our properties, that does financial training, health wellness training. And these are some of the typical costs associated with building these 100% affordable housing buildings. And when you have, if it's one person can do 60 units or 20 units, right? It's a lot more cost efficient from a operational standpoint if their time is used reaching out to 60 residents, right? So that's the point I'm trying to make. It from a, we are not only a developer, but a management and services company. So when I talk to the management side of the house, when you spread things out over more units, then it's easier to get a budget that can actually be achieved. Because obviously we're not making anything close to market rent. So.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. I love that idea of the scattered site development, by the way. So thank you.
Yep.
Great, thanks. I think we're ready to move to public comment, and these would be comments that are on this item. And I see at least one hand is raised, and that would be Lisa. And you should be ready to go.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I am a San Rafael resident, and I just found out about this process, this working group, about 45 minutes ago. So I just quickly jumped on into the meeting about a half an hour ago. I can tell you that I'm not alone, that most people I've talked to, my neighbors, I'm on Greenfield Avenue, by the way, had no idea about even the housing element impact. So we're either in the dark or trying to get up to speed in a very compressed time frame. It's a bit like sipping out of a fire hose right now, with all the information I'm taking in. But beyond all that, I think I just want to say that I very much want to promote affordable housing within the San Rafael city limits. I'm a homeowner. We're looking at developing a junior ADU in our home. We drive down 4th Street and we just count the number of empty storefronts. We're like, you can have people living there, you can have people living there, you can have people living there. And like I said, I'm a half an hour into this into this process. So I know, you're the experts. I appreciate all the work you're doing. And my question is, how can I get more involved?
Great, Lisa, thank you. Thanks for asking that question. I'm going to suggest that you email Alexis or I, and we have a conversation offline. We do have a website. If you go to sanrafaelhousing.org, that will take you to an opportunity to send an email to us or send a message to us. And then we can follow up and talk to you more about how to get involved.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
I see another hand raised, Alana Williams. And Alana, we're not able to hear you. Seems like maybe your audio. Yep, there you are. There you are. Go ahead.
You fix it. My name is Alana Williams. I live in downtown San Rafael. Been here for a couple of years. I'm from the area, and I just want to say, great job. Thank you so much for all the work to identify sites and also the commitment to actually follow through on this site. I think we all know that San Rafael is in desperate need of housing. I'm a young person who really struggled to find affordable housing here, and used to work for a social services agency where this was just the dominating issue. So I really appreciate the work and the commitment, and people are always really hard on Marin as a place that's unwelcoming, but I feel like y'all are doing a good job to push against that narrative. And I would just want to echo a lot of things Linda in particular said about be ambitious. I like the ideas about upzoning and going for 300%, and the need is really high, and the commitment to getting us units, I think is really important. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for being here. Are there any other public comments? Okay, I see no other hands raised, so we'll come back to any member and staff announcements. And again, Ali or Alexis, would you have anything you wanted to add or share at this point? Any updates on the housing survey or other comments?
I want to just thank everybody again. Another great meeting, and appreciate your input, Daniel. Really appreciate your input and perspective. There are things that we just don't know, and I was looking at this team again and realizing we have experts here that are really providing input that is so valuable, and I'm just very grateful. So yeah, I don't have anything else to add. Alexis, did you want to? I don't know if we have any new information on the survey. Alexis, I don't know if you have anything new to add to that.
I don't have anything to add at this point. What I will say is that definitely by our next meeting, we'll have some significant updates to share on that front. So just want to echo the thanks and appreciation for everyone's time, the panelists' time, and also the attendees who are here tonight listening and also providing input.
Great, thanks. And I'm going to put another plug in for our website, which is sanrafaelhousing.org. For those who may have missed it when I provided that information earlier, you can email us at that address and get in touch with us directly, and then we can have a one-on-one communication for anyone who's in the public who wants more information or wants to get involved in this. We're also looking at doing community workshops and some additional outreach in the future, going to neighborhood meetings and so forth. So, please invite us to your events. We will attend. And I see Amy, you have a comment?
Yes, one of your slides had the work ahead listed, what we've done and where we're going. And I was trying to count the months forward as far as our meeting dates so that I can plan. Do you have us on a schedule still of the third Thursday in the month? So that would be through July, or how does it look? Are you going to attach some dates to?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. The confirmed dates are the third Thursday of April and the third Thursday of May. Those are definites for the working group. We still have a third meeting that needs to be scheduled. We were hoping to have it before the third Thursday of June because we'd like to be done by then, well, at least with our draft. If we need to have another meeting, it would likely be in May at this point. And we may have a June meeting if we don't make that deadline. But our schedule is really driven at this point by getting a draft to the state so that they can review it before we adopt it.
And then I have a follow-up question. Are you going to be presenting on the 21st, an update to the housing?
Oh, thanks for bringing that up. Yes,
welcome.
I am. Wait, the 21st? No, that's
oh, wait, is that the wrong date?
There is a meeting on the 21st, but mine is on April 5th.
So on the 21st, there's an update to the housing. Maybe that's Ally.
I think it's the progress report.
And that is Alexis. Oh, am I unmute? Yeah, that is Alexis that will be giving that report. But our meeting for the housing element
the 4th.
is on the 4th. Yeah.
I keep saying the 5th. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So on April 4th, Monday night, we will be providing a progress report to the City Council on the housing element. On March 21st is the annual progress report on housing, which is really how have we been doing over the last year? What are the major accomplishments and so forth? Both.
And then do you have a date as to when the next, what do we call it? Inventory will be ready?
Not at this point. We need to do that communication I was describing about reaching out to property owners, and it's kind of an evolving process. There may be a preliminary list and then another list, and then it's kind of growing over time. Yeah.
Thank you.
By next month, I'll commit to that. Yeah, thanks. Great. Okay. Are there any other announcements from working group members? Okay, I don't see any hands up there. And then a final opportunity for public comment. I do see one hand raised from Kim Keith Brown.
Hi, sorry I didn't get my hand up earlier during public comment. I just wanted to, I know you all are finishing the meeting. This is I live in Terralinda. I work closely with, I've been the president of Terralinda Homeowners Association, which just at the outset, I will say, first of all, I'm speaking on on my own behalf, not anybody else's, but also we are actively changing the name from Homeowners Association to Neighborhood or Community Association for what I think are obvious reasons. One being that our community is and will continue to be made up of people who are not just homeowners. So I say that, and then speaking for myself and not anybody else in the changing association, I am incredibly impressed. I have not been to your meetings before, and I thank you for opening it to these meetings to the public. I learned a tremendous amount from the slideshow and from the discussion, and I would love to, in fact, invite you to speak to some of our community members at some point. This is, as one of the previous observers said, it's like drinking from a fire hose. It certainly is. The complexities of this topic are tremendous. I will also say that Terra Linda currently has, I think, 4 on the books and not developments, Northgate Walk, Northgate, Los Gamos, and then the possibility of something at the former Nazareth House. And again, speaking for myself, that is terrific. We have been enthusiastically engaging with Merlin Geyer. Very happy to hear the EAH is working with them. These are positive developments, and we will continue to engage around things that will ensure that the quality of life for current and future residents is on par, and that this becomes a bigger and a thriving community. So I just say that because there is talk about certain parts of the city not being welcoming. I just want to say I am impressed with this group, impressed with the process that's happening, and very grateful to be able to observe and learn from this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim, and thanks for being here. Really appreciate your comments. Also wanted to just add that the PowerPoint that we showed today will be available on the website at sanrafaelhousing.org in the next couple of days. We post everything that's presented at the meetings on the website following the meeting, so keep looking for it. We'll try to get it ahead of time if we can. That brings us to the end of our agenda. Again, want to thank everybody for being here, and we'll see you all in a month, if not sooner. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Ally.
Thanks, everyone.